Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Published by Greenleaf Book Group. My name is Tanya Hall, and today I will be speaking with brand strategist Karina Keating about proof of concept and understanding your message as an author.
Welcome to Published, a podcast by Greenleaf Book Group, where we'll discuss the ins and outs of the publishing industry, from writing a book and finding the right publisher to gearing up for a book launch. And now, here's your host, Greenleaf Book Group CEO, Tanya Hall.
In the last episode, we spoke with one of our brand strategists about what a platform is and what the components of the platform are. But today we're going to be focusing in on understanding your message and why you should be the one talking about it. So in essence, once you've got the idea of the building blocks of the platform, the next step is using your content and ideas to put it all together into a coherent strategy. So to that end, I have Karina Keating, a brand strategist here at Greenleaf Book Group with me today. Welcome, Karina.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what you do here at Greenleaf.
Sure. As you said, I do work here as a brand strategist, and so I'm really working with authors behind the scenes, usually about 6 months out of publication, to really start building their messaging, so honing in on the essence of what it is that they're doing and what value they're trying to add to their target audiences, and then figuring out how that plays into some of the marketing initiatives that we will be rolling out to them a little bit closer to publication and right after the book launches. A piece of that as well is building their digital presence. Mm-hmm. So are they on social media? And if they are, what can we be doing a little bit better to ramp up and really get noticed in what is a very busy marketplace?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head right there. So why is it so important for them to understand what problem they solve?
Well, this is a really good place to start, because if you don't first know what problem you're solving, you can't exactly communicate that to your would-be audiences, can you? So this is also a really good place to start in terms of understanding what value you bring and what problem you're solving, to then identifying who your target audiences are. That's really the first piece of the puzzle, and then also figuring out how you can differentiate yourself in the marketplace. And then beyond that, really knowing the problem you solve helps you then figure out what transformation you offer. And I really want to hone in on that point, because really selling on transformation tends to be a lot more effective than selling on product features. So when someone has gotten to the end of your book, or gotten to the end of that webinar or that service or product, what will be different with them? How will their world change? Really hone in on that point. That's going to make more of an impact.
Mm-hmm. So the promise behind their message, really.
The promise, absolutely. How the promise is essentially a translation of your vision. So your vision is, what do you want? What do you want to see as a result of this book coming out into the world? The promise is, what are the practical applications of that? How do you usher that change into the world? And how do you want to see that play out in someone's life? Mm-hmm. Correct?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I believe in one of our previous episodes, we talked about a point that I often make when I'm talking with authors, which is that with all of the competition out there in terms of media, not just books, but everything else on top of that, the smart author is thinking about the fact that when someone is considering buying your book, it's not about $20. It's about 2 weeks of their time. So you really have to make that promise that whatever silver bullet you're wrapping into your book title has to be so strong that it hits them over the head, so they know that it is worth their 2 weeks.
Absolutely, that's correct.
Yeah. Lately, I can't finish a book in 2 weeks, but you get my drift.
Right, and it's not all about the book, of course. I mean, the book is a big piece of it, but you also want to attract people to your platform and to the idea of you being that thought leader in your space through other value add touch points. That could be on your website through a blog. It could be through your presence on social media, or other ways that you decide to incentivize people to pay attention, but also, again, add value to a pain point they're feeling.
Mm-hmm. So going back to something you just said about basically establishing themselves as a thought leader, a lot of people, I think, are confused about whether they qualify, to put it simply.
Right.
So what does make someone a quote-unquote thought leader? How do they what makes them the person to speak on a certain subject or
Right.
solve a problem?
Well, I think it starts with passion. So if you can demonstrate your passion in an area and couple that with your experience, then there's no reason why you can't be the person someone looks to. Of course, there are exceptions. So there are certain fields that do require technical skills and expertise. But outside of that, I really, again, as we talked about, it's connecting that vision with the promise, with that literal translation of what you see this book bringing to the world, this product bringing to the world. And I think of Simon Sinek. He refers to the golden circle of why, how, and what, and being able to communicate those aspects of your brand in that order to the public. And doing that in that order will make people feel a personal connection to not only what you're offering, but to you. If you can have them connect with your why, they're going to care about you as a brand and as a person. It's going to really humanize you as a voice and a thought leader. And then the products and services and any sort of content you develop that follows that is something they're going to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. So as you're thinking through the why, how, and what, all of it, of course, is relative to an audience you're trying to target. So how do you begin to understand who this audience is and who you're crafting all of this around?
Right. So I was thinking about an Inc. article that you wrote, Tanya, not so long ago.
Me?
Yes, on getting to know your audience. And one of the tips you put in there was basically going through the exercise of asking yourself, what problem am I solving? What value do I add to my customers? And what impact do I have on their lives? So again, as we talked about earlier, you first need to understand those aspects. You go a little bit internal before you can figure out exactly who those audience members are. I would also say doing some research on some sources that are publicly available, so you can start getting a better sense of some of the demographics around your subject area that makes sense. So Pew Research Center, they've done a lot of reader demographics studies, for example. Mm-hmm. That's always a good place to start. You can also go through any magazine articles, reputable newspaper or journal periodicals to uncover those trends and demographic information that can help you tease out some of the important characteristics around your audience. So let me just give you an example. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I found is that women are more likely to read fiction, whereby men gravitate towards nonfiction. However, when I was doing some research for one of our authors, I uncovered that within the nonfiction genre, traditionally more women gravitate towards self-help books rather than men. So these are things, again, you can uncover through that research, particularly around the book market, because that's the frame with which we're looking at this. So you're really narrowing down some of those key demographics to start thinking about who your audience is, while also asking yourself those deeper questions about what it is that you're trying to solve in the world and for specific people. And when you marry those two things together, you start getting a better sense of who those individuals might be that you want to start targeting.
Okay, so the demographic part seems straightforward enough. Like you said, there are resources out there to better understand who's consuming different types of content. But in terms of their pain points, that feels a little harder to, as you said, tease out of the data out there. So how do you start to understand what their pain points are, especially if you don't sit within that group and you can't necessarily directly relate?
So I would say that if you already have an audience established, it's a little bit easier because what you can do is you can actually survey them. So there might be a way to incentivize them to fill out a survey, or they might be just willing to do that. You can tease out some psychographic information and ask them some pointed questions about what it is that, what area of their life they feel the most pain, and what you could be doing to be the best resource possible to them. If you don't have an established audience, I would say don't fret. There is another way to do it, and it's really surveying yourself. So Michael Hyatt, who is someone that wrote a book called Get Noticed in a Noisy World, and he's just an expert platform builder and advises people in all sorts of industries on how to build up their presence through various means. So he has an exercise called Map Your Message. And It's really excellent because it has you answering a few questions that when you're done, you really should have a clear sense of who you want your customer avatars to start looking like. So let me give you some examples of some of those questions. What people or causes do you find yourself naturally drawn to? Who are you most passionate about helping? What causes the people you want to serve the most pain and frustration? So again, you're asking yourself that question as opposed to surveying an existing audience, and that's okay because you're really distilling what it is that you are offering. So to continue with these questions as examples, what is the one thing you wish people knew that would demonstrably change their lives for the better? How could your interests help the people you care about serving? How would their lives be different or better? What's at stake if you don't help people in the way you've just described? And that last question gets at the urgency. What is at stake? That is the call to action. And whomever that applies to the most would be your primary target reader or customer.
Okay. So once you have the pain points identified, I have what's maybe an easy question and then probably a bit of a curveball here.
Sure. Okay.
So obviously, what do you do next? Once you have the pain points figured out, there's probably a brand strategist next step. But
right.
The other question that maybe is a bit of a curveball, what if the answers to what is your pain point, where do you have a need, what if that's not in your wheelhouse?
Oh, okay. Well, I would say that to answer the second question first, if you find it's outside of your wheelhouse, but you clearly have an affinity for it, and it is tied in and complementary to what you're already doing, I think that might be a point where you think about developing a partnership, or maybe it's a good time to outsource some of the things that you're doing. Not everybody, when they're launching a book and building a new platform, is ready and at the point, resource-wise, to start building a team. But that might be something to keep an eye on for the future. And there are, I think this is sort of taking me to a different area of talking a little bit about how important it is to recognize where your passion areas are and your strengths are, and then the other aspects of your platform that needs to happen doesn't need to be done by you. So maybe you absolutely love to speak publicly because you love to connect with an audience, but you are maybe not as strong on keeping track of your calendar, of that really, really busy calendar. Well, maybe there are some people that can help you out with that. And that is an easier thing to outsource. You don't love to do it, and you're not particularly good at it. Why don't you outsource that? So I think it's a balancing act of getting to a point where you're able to spend those resources, but also thinking about, well, if I outsource some of these things on the outset, it's going to free up so much time for me to then focus more on the things that I love to build that platform even further. So it's something to ponder early on, definitely, when you're building up that platform.
Yeah, it's a big strategic decision.
It is a strategic decision, correct. Yeah.
Good.
And then I think you also asked me, what do you do after you've identified the pain points?
Yes.
So the biggest thing that we advise our authors to do is to start tailoring content. So once you have those customer avatars created or the target personas created, then you can think about, well, now that I know what it is that they need and that they're lacking and that they're seeking, what kind of content can I develop to usher them along the buyer's journey if they were to visit my website, if they were to follow me on Twitter, that will eventually result in them making a purchase of my book or any other set of services. So really it gives you focus. It gives you focus and allows you to strategize on what kind of content you're going to roll out and when. And that's really very crucial because it does writing content for your blog. Typically that's a weekly blog. That's what we recommend. Or coming up with a consistent posting schedule for Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, what have you. That's a commitment and it takes time and you have to integrate that into your everyday. you want to make sure that those efforts aren't in vain. You want to make sure that you have those customer avatars in mind on the outset, so you're developing content that's going to be targeted and going to add value to them, and again, usher them along the buyer's journey to eventually convert them to a paying customer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so once we have the pain point established, we have a sense of the solution we're going to be providing. Mm-hmm. I know that you spend a lot of time working through the competitive landscape on the front end when talking with our authors about their master plan to launch. So why is that so important? Help our audience understand why that's a big focus of your work.
That's very important. And I would say part of that is being aware of what your competitors are doing lets you glean best practices. And it's not a chance to look at what they're doing and then say, I'm going to do something completely different to stand out. That's not actually the right approach. Modeling tends to be a very effective approach, actually. So looking to reverse engineer almost the work of others, because there's no need to reinvent the wheel. So what is working for others, and how are they attracting audience members that are similar to yours? And then really emulate the parts that make sense for your particular brand. And that's not being a copycat, because as long as you're true to your vision and your passions, that is what is going to make you unique. That's going to make you stand out. And emulating the parts of someone's platform that works well is going to help you be successful as well as stand out.
Mm-hmm. So that authenticity is what you're hitting at there.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. That is such a key word, I think, in our conversation. Mm-hmm. Authenticity is pretty key. And if that isn't there, people will lose interest because, again, they're not connecting with the human behind the brand, behind the book. They're not connecting with your why.
Right. And frankly, I would say the author will eventually lose interest as well, because if it's not an authentic effort that they care about, they tend to lose steam over time, as you know.
Absolutely.
So in addition to authenticity, helping to set someone apart, I know certainly when I speak with authors, and I'm sure you've had the same experience, sometimes as outsiders, we can more easily see what their differentiators are, what makes them in fact, sometimes it's glaringly obvious to us, and when we tell them, it's like this bright light goes off, and they think, oh, you're right, I am different in that way, and to me, that's just me, but I didn't realize that it makes me different. So how do they really hone in on what makes them different, and then how do they highlight that?
Right. So I would say in the same vein of what we were just talking about, I would have them worry less about doing something differently and instead worry about doing it really well. It gets me actually thinking about Seth Godin's Purple Cow. Mm-hmm. So his whole philosophy there is to really have strong core values and make every day a masterpiece, if you will. Or, as he calls it, a purple cow. So you're always striving for excellence in anything that you do and in the content you put out into the world. And that's going to be your differentiator. And then again, to add to that, it's the purple cow connected with the authenticity. So I like bringing in Simon Sinek as well as Seth Godin, because he talks about the why. Seth Godin talks about standing out by being excellent through brilliance. So those two together is what is going to, I guess, ultimately be your differentiator.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So once we have all of this stuff figured out, all the strategy stuff on the front end that goes into what we do for our authors quite often, a brand audit. Some businesses would take care of this through a SWOT analysis. Mm-hmm. But what do they do with this information then to apply it to the work so that it doesn't just become this legacy document sitting on a hard drive somewhere and it's actually helping to guide their decisions? How do they actually integrate this into their effort and put it to work?
Well, so what I would say is this isn't a static thing. Your brand messaging, once you have it, treat it as an ever-evolving, living, breathing entity, because you may very well need to recalibrate along the way as your brand and platform grows, and you may need to tweak your visual branding. You may need to re-gear even the kind of content you put out there. But as far as pedal to the metal type of thing, how this translates into action, I would have the essence of your brand messaging. So we do a brand positioning slide with a vision and promise and supporting pillars, and we call that the roadmap. And it's the guide that authors can refer to throughout their platform building experience and throughout the book, kind of the book development experience. Where they ensure that any content they put out there and any way they present themselves to target consumers is going to be consistent and is going to be true to their ultimate vision and be seeing through the promise that they set out to give to their potential customers. So again, having that as that guide and using that also to develop the right kinds of content. So again, those efforts aren't going to be wasted. As you said, time is precious, and it is a big time commitment, not only building a platform, but the whole book process. And it really isn't something that should end with the book publication date. And that is really to keep the attention of the followers that you work so hard to gain, because likely there'll be subsequent books, there may be subsequent business goals beyond the book. And so to nurse those efforts well beyond the book's publication will ensure that your platform has long legs and is evergreen.
Agreed. And in fact, I would take it a step further and say they absolutely have to continue beyond the book, because we've seen what it does for book sales. And so often we have this little spike right out of the gate when there's a lot of activity and the activity stops and then the book sales crater. So those things go hand in hand. It's all sort of driving, it's all content driving the same message, driving product and services. And when it stops, then there are consequences.
And I think even a short lull will alienate those followers, and it'll be really hard to recoup any losses like that.
Yeah, and that would be a shame.
It would be.
Any other tips, bits of advice for the folks listening to our podcast today?
Sure. So just going back to the idea of your audience being ever evolving, I think I had mentioned that recalibration may be needed as you are working your messaging around your brand, because your audience needs may change. Maybe 5 years ago, they needed advice on how to grow their social media presence. But today, they might be more interested in seeking tips on time management and building a team. Mm-hmm. So keeping a finger on the pulse of what your followers are saying to you, and that could be reactive. You could be looking at questions asked and comments left in response to your blog posts and social media posts. It could also be reactive. So you could be sending out surveys on a periodic basis to just make sure that what you are providing is continuing to add value and is staying current. So I think it's important, again, to not look at it as a static thing, but as an ever-evolving, growing, very much living being that is your brand, which is, in essence, you.
Mm-hmm. Brand you. All right, well, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, Karina, for joining us on Published. For notes and resources from today's show, go to greenleafbookgroup.com/episode 5. Numeric 5, greenleafbookgroup.com/episode 5. And if you'd like to hear more about what we're up to at Greenleaf, remember to sign up for our newsletter.
Thanks for listening to Published. To learn more, please visit greenleafbookgroup.com. And remember to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes.